So here's the card that I designed to send out to my friends and family this year. And yes, I waited till the last minute, but that's kind of how I do things. And this is just an overview of all the different tools and papers that I used in order to complete this card. And I started by making this first one. And after making one, I decided I liked it and proceeded to cut all the different elements out. So the watercolor paper is cut to the size of 3 by 3. And then there's a base that's also 5 1/4 by 4. And that's of Whisper White. And I'm using the scoreboard to get a perfect score. And then I cut them in half. And that makes 2 card bases that are 5 1/2 by 4 1/4. Then I stamp each of the 3 by 3 pieces of watercolor paper with the nativity scene using the Peaceful Nativity stamp set. After stamping all of them and letting the ink dry, I started using some watercolor paints. And at first I was very timid about putting the paint down. As you can see here, I started super light, and by the 3rd or 4th one, I get a little more daring and apply the paint thicker and quicker. Nothing has to be perfect when you're doing this, even though sometimes I feel like I need to be perfect in making it look how I want it to look. But if people don't see the original or compare one to another, they won't know exactly if it's perfect or a little bit off from what you were trying to do. They're just going to know that you sent them a card that you made, and that is the special part of being a card maker. So yes, on December 19th, I decided to do this, and I thought if I record the whole thing start to finish, I can show people how they can actually make a fairly unique Christmas card quickly. And I do think it took about 7 hours total, with breaks, of course, to make 15 cards. And you might think, wow, that's a lot. It is, but it takes time to actually color each one in. And as you can see here, I start kind of going a little bit faster and applying the blue a little bit thicker. And with watercolor, I'm not really confident yet with watercoloring. In fact, I need to practice a little bit more with it, but I think I'm getting the hang of it towards the end, like card number 15. So here we go. I'm just kind of making sure that I'm making it darker on top and around and lighter towards the center, so that it'll give an impression of a glowing coming off of the baby Jesus. And I decided to add this yellow, which really brings the focal point to the center and to the baby Jesus. And I just love how Stampin' Up! Comes up with stamp sets that really touch on the true meaning of Christmas. And yes, we have lots of fun ones too. I really like the gnome set and the holly, and there's a bunch of different sets that you can use. But for me, I just wanted to stress the importance of the birth of Jesus for this year, because 2020 has kind of been a hard year for people. We really haven't been secure in knowing what's going to happen in the future with this coronavirus and everything, and with the pandemic and school being out and fires and riots, and it's just been really an uncertain year. So I wanted to just make a very peaceful nativity scene for my Christmas card. And what I started doing, and I showed this section of the video in real time, not speed it up, because I wanted to show you how the details are done. And you make a little bit of a highlight by not putting any ink there, but then I did go back and put a lighter shade of brown. And also it's important to just kind of highlight the where the glow is coming from, and to put shadows, because without shadows it's going to look two-dimensional, and we want it to kind of pop off the page and look more realistic, even though a watercolor is definitely one that of the mediums that you can use to make a more like not abstract, but just something that's more fluid, and it looks like you made it rather than a photograph. But I'm super impressed by people who can paint photorealistic. But that's not my style. Usually I kind of go more abstract with my paintings. But, I really like using the watercolors to create the scene. And as you'll see further on, I kind of touch up the sky and make it look a bit darker, like it's a night sky. And so this is using just kind of different colors and almost using a paintbrush that is just wet and picking up a little bit of the brown off of the robe and adding shadow to their faces and to their necks, and also putting a little shadow under the crib, and going back and adding darker colors. I always start light to dark to add and build on each other. And so yeah, I was just thinking, okay, how many cards can I make in a day? And I decided to give it a go and make as many as I could. And here I am going back in and adding a darker blue, like a navy blue, and then adding a little bit of purple. And I find that I do this with my colored pencils. I layer the colors on top of each other. So I was trying to do that with the watercolor, and I don't know if it just muddied it up, and I probably was getting a little frustrated at one point and moved on to the next one and let it dry. I think with watercolors you can let it dry and then go back over it. I watched a few videos on it, and I have taken a class on watercoloring, but for what I've tried to do, it just doesn't want to cooperate. So for what I want it to look like most of the time. And I think the overall, the one that I made turned out pretty good. So I put it above the one that I'm working on, just so I can kind of use it as a reference. A lot of people work off of photos that they find or images on the internet, but for me, I just kind of made what I thought I want it to look like, and then used that as the reference photo. And here I am just kind of adding more detail. I think this is time-lapsed, I'm not sure. It takes time. I figured it was about 2 cards per hour that I had ended up completing. And when you decide to be a crafter, you do it because you love it. And for me, I really enjoyed this process. I enjoyed how I started off with just a blank square of white paper, and it came to life like this. And stamps definitely help if you're one of those who's kind of nervous about drawing or your ability to make things look how you want it to look. Stamp is the best way to alleviate that concern, because what I've found is that I can take an ink that's kind of light colored and stamp the image on the paper and then color. And you won't even see the stamped image, the line art. What you'll see is what you've colored next to it and over it. So for this process, I'm just kind of showing how easy it is to get a somewhat mass-produced card to look uniform but still be unique. And I hope that each of the recipients of the cards enjoyed getting them, and I really enjoyed making these. Kind of being a painter first before I was a stamper, I learned a lot about shadows and blending and complementary colors, and that's something that anyone can learn. But the part that is the fun part is the practicing. So kind of get in there and just play around with the paints and the colors and just see what you like, because ultimately when you're painting, it's about what you like. And so I'm just kind of going in and adding some more detail on the hay with a darker color. And I think on one of them I made it too dark and I had to go in with a light watercolor, just pure watercolor, and kind of remove it. Okay, here I did the stars, and Stampin' Up's great with their matching dies for each stamp set, and I love the saying, for unto us a child is born. And so this was kind of cool, and I actually signed them like an artist because they're each individuals. I used dimensionals to pop them up so that they'll kind of give a little bit of a shadow and look more framed. And after putting all the bases to the fronts using dimensionals, I end up using the whole sheet of dimensionals and even the edge. And if you don't want it to be a big piece of dimensional, you can cut it up using scissors. I ended up putting each of these down, and I just wanted you to see that I filmed the whole process. And so each card, 15 of them, and I ended up making too many stars for some reason, punching out a bunch, which was okay because I ended up having to make a few more Christmas cards for people who sent them to me late. I always want to send a card to someone who sent me a card. And so then we have these mini dimensionals that fit perfectly on the star. And I just attached it to each one. And I think I used the pick a tool and added the rhinestone to the center. I use like the smallest rhinestone. And some say that it might cost extra to ship that, but it did kind of pop up just a little bit when I rubbed over the envelope, but it wasn't enough that I thought it needed extra postage. And sure enough, it got there to the recipients. So, and here's all the completed cards. As you can see, each one's a little bit different. And I just really enjoyed making these cards. And I hope that you enjoyed watching this video. If you have any questions, please leave a comment and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.